especially those of you working here this afternoon. Yeah, no.
All right, better? All right. Well, welcome to our first town hall. Looks like we have a full crowd today. So we're going to go through a couple of things. We'll talk about our department and where we're at. We'll talk about the BINS notifications. We'll talk about some of the things we're doing to help get the word out, some of our resources and those kind of things. So if you have any questions, feel free to just pop them up, interrupt me anytime if you guys feel the need to. So looking at to start off with, to look at the campus footprint, you'll see the campus extends 2.7 miles. The core of the campus is about a half mile at 0.7. There's 28 properties that Berklee owns. There's 10 leased properties. And from the 2010 Census Bureau statistics, this area has about 34,500 residents in our community. So that's kind of you'll see the map on the side here is kind of the footprint of Berklee. As far as our department personnel and staffing goes, we have the chief, who's me, Dave Ransom. We have a vacant captain's position that we're going to try to fill by the end of May. So we're going to try to get that one filled as well. We have three lieutenants, which we have one lieutenant here is Mike McKay. We have 3 sergeants. We have one sergeant here, who's Pat Foley. Those 2 positions are supervisory positions. And then we have 13 police officers who are commonly referred to as street officers. Those are the officers that are actually responding to calls. No, guess not. We also have some civilian staff. We have 5 dispatchers. We have an operations manager, a technical operations manager as well, handles a lot of our IT operations. We have a fire and safety supervisor, does a lot of the key locks and a fire safety aspect. And our emergency management senior manager, who's standing right here and is helping me out try to get through this presentation here, Mr. Andrew Murphy. We do have 3 campus liaisons or safety liaisons officers who are stationed at the posts, and they are similar to some of the security guards, which we'll talk about. We'll talk about next. As far as our staffing levels, just kind of gives you a brief overview of how each of our shifts are staffed. We have 3 shifts, one from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., and then the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. is the overnight shift. We operate, obviously, 24/7, 365 days a year. Just on the right-hand side of the screen here, you'll see how each shift is outfitted. So you'll have 1 lieutenant, 1 sergeant, and 4 officers on day shift. Evening shift, you'll have a lieutenant, a sergeant, and you'll have 5 officers assigned to that shift. The overnight shift, you'll have 1 lieutenant, you'll have 1 sergeant, and you'll have 4 officers. And that's how each shift is staffed. We do run on a 24/7, but however, when you take into account days off, training, those kind of things, that 5 officers on day shift or evening shift, or 4 officers that you have, there may be only 2, there may be only 3. But we always try to have at least 2 patrol officers on campus at all times, and a supervisor. So that's kind of how their shifts work. And in addition to the uniformed section of police officers, we also have our department. We have our allied security personnel. We got 1 manager, Ryan Schott. There's 6 supervisors, and then there's probably about 40 security guards. And what they do is they'll conduct some of the escorts. They're at the fixed post in all of our buildings, and they also do our door unlocks. So that's a lot of their responsibilities. The picture on the right here shows our surveillance cameras in our dispatch office. We started off, I believe, a few years back. There was like 13 cameras. There's well over 400 now. So this is kind of the dispatchers will handle our access control, getting in and out of buildings. If somebody doesn't have their ID, they'll call our dispatch office and they'll be able to let in. Our emergency phones and our building intercoms. If you walk up, most of our buildings will have those silver intercoms. You push it, say what your business is, and the dispatcher will be able to let you into that building from the remote location. So that's kind of a picture of our police dispatch. Some of our activities and some of our resources. We have vehicle and foot patrols. We have 2 vehicles now. We just got okayed by our boss to get a third, so we're going to purchase a third car come June. Foot patrols and bikes. We should have a couple of more officers going to our bike training to get certified in bike patrol, so they'll be going out as soon as it warms up a little bit. I thought it would already warm up now, but apparently it hasn't. The rain's going to stick around. So we'll have some bike officers out. You'll see them in pairs around campus. So you'll see that coming up here in the next few weeks. We also do investigations. We have a lost and found. Some of the activities that our officers get engaged in, or the Toys for Tots. They did a gathering up of some toys and with some of the other surrounding schools for the Toys for Tots for the Marines. There's a torch run that the officers are going to do that's going to be coming up. That's for Special Olympics. So you'll be probably seeing some announcements coming out for that as well. Our pop-up informational events. We just had one this morning. I think Lieutenant McKay was at that one this morning in 160. And he passed out some information on frauds and scams that a lot of our international students seem to be becoming victims of. So that was held this morning at 9 o'clock or 9:30. So we're probably going to do a few more of those. We're going to try to do those a couple a month. And we're going to rotate them out into different buildings, residential halls, and those kind of things. So we'll definitely see more of those coming out. Our one card and bicycle pavilion too is some of the stuff that we're responsible for. The resources we have, obviously the safety escorts. We have the RAD training, which is rape aggression defense training. I think part of that course is going on this week. We have our CPR and first aid training, our armed intruder training, our BINS notification that we'll talk about here in a little bit, and also our Rave Guardian application. And what the Rave Guardian is, it's pretty much a virtual escort. They'll be able to watch you wherever you go virtually from our dispatch office. You can punch in anonymous tips and those kind of things. So we'll give you the information on the Rave Guardian as well. So those are some of the police activities and resources that our department is involved in. Any questions on our department as a whole? Don't everybody ask questions at once. All right, so we'll move on to our jurisdiction. I know there were some questions over the last week or so that talked about what our jurisdiction is here on campus and in the city of Boston. So our exercise, the authority that we have is the law enforcement authority is like any other municipality or other college. We have the authority to make detentions, stopping people and talking to them, arrests, and the ability to search as well. So that's kind of the core component of the law enforcement authority. Along with that authority is how we respond and what kind of calls we respond to. So those type of incidents that we respond to are those criminal offenses occurring in or around our buildings, our structures, some of our lands, roads that are owned, occupied, or used by Berklee. Owned, occupied, or used by Berklee. So there's the Wendy's. We'll respond to Wendy's. We'll respond to some of those buildings that are leased by Berklee. We'll respond to. So that kind of gives you an idea of what kind of calls we'll respond to or where. Did we skip a? Yeah, I think that.
Ben's incident location, Ben's advisory, Ben's incident, Ben's type, criteria for Ben's issuance.
Okay, so Ben's notification. All right. So the Ben's notifications, this goes along with what our jurisdiction is because it's going to dictate how we put out a notification to the campus. The purpose of the notification is for a serious or continuing threat for students and employees. Serious and continuing threat for students and employees. And it allows the campus to protect themselves from that serious threat that might be ongoing. The activation, in order for a BINS to go out, it's going to be the type of incident that occurs, and the location of the incident. And that's why it's important that we kind of touched on our jurisdiction, because a location of the incident will have to be somewhere on campus. If it's an off-campus, there is some leeway we have in responding as far as how far away from campus it might be, from how far away from a building it might be. So we'll touch on that as we go through it. So the purpose is a serious and continuing threat, and it's also the activation is the type of incident and the location. Type of incident and location. Doesn't matter if it's a Berklee student or another member of the community. If an incident does occur and it's BINS related or BINS notification needs to go out, it'll be the type of incident and the location, regardless of whether it's a student or not. So here's the criteria. Here's some of the things that we're going to look at that are going to justify whether a BINS notification is going to go out. So the first one is the crime must have been reported to campus police or local police. So it's either reported to us or the local police. That's one of the criteria we're looking at. The second one is going to be did it occur on campus or immediately accessible public property or at a non-campus location such as a remote classroom. And a remote classroom is still a building that we own or operate, so we're still going to have to respond to that building, and a BINS will still go out depending on the type of incident and location. Public property, again, that's going to be in relation to one of our buildings. Say we walk out of this building right here, our jurisdiction is probably going to be right at the front door to the sidewalk, to the street. And that's a clearly reported crime would have to occur in that area for us to think about putting a BINS out. Now, if you go another block or two another way, or 2 or 3 blocks or 4 blocks, that's going to be off campus, and it's going to be iffy. But these are the kind of things we're going to look at whether we're going to put a BINS out. You going to say something? Nope.
Yeah, there's a lot of gray area when it comes to issuing BINS notifications. I'll grab that mic for a second. It's dictated that the officer in charge, whether or not it's a lieutenant or a sergeant, is the one that makes that final call at night in coordination with myself or others that happen to be on duty that given day. It depends on, as the chief said, the location of the incident and the type of incident involved. Most recently, there was an incident at Heinz Convention Center that actually occurred in the station itself. Typically, at that time that it occurred, given the facts that were presented to us, a BINS notification wasn't deemed necessary. Again, given all the information that public safety had, that Berklee Police had at that time. As the chief said, you go a couple of blocks away, we have to be mindful of how many messages we're putting out. We don't want to inundate the community with too many messages to the point where we're crying wolf, where people become desensitized to all of our messages. We want to make sure that when you get a BINS notification, it is either school's closed because of weather, and everyone loves those, or there is an immediate or active threat occurring on or near campus within a couple of blocks.
Thank you, sir. We'll also look at the type of incident location are going to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. There are some things, say there's an incident that occurred right out in the front of our building here. If an arrest was made, say the Boston Police showed up and an arrest was made almost immediately, we probably, although had that arrest not been made, we would have probably put out a bins alert, but because it was made immediately, the ongoing threat is no longer there, so we probably wouldn't put a bins out. So there's that's why they're kind of evaluated on a case-by-case basis, because there's information like that occurs. It might be a serious event, but is it an ongoing event? And if it's not, that might be a reason why we don't put something out. So other things we're going to look at as far as bins notification, the facts surrounding the crime, that might be one of them. Is it still ongoing? Did the police officers get there in enough time to stop the threat? Or is it kind of an ongoing kind of deal? The nature of the crime, there are certain offenses that are clearly mandated that we report: aggravated assault, robbery, arson, burglary, homicides. Those type of calls are kind of violent in nature, or felony offenses that we call them. We're mandated to report those, but there might be a incident that we talked about was at Hines, was an assault that was just a one-off. It was one assault, physical altercation, and then that was it. Wasn't ongoing. The description of the person we didn't get till like 6 hours later. So sometimes those all play into whether we're going to put a bins notification out. The continued danger to the campus is what we mentioned before. Does the incident appear to be a one-off or a pattern? So we'll look at that as well. And the risk factors compromising law enforcement efforts. Those are, if we say there's a string of burglaries going on, we'll probably put a bins out depending on the nature of them. But if we feel like if we put that information out and it has and it kind of holds up our investigation, or we look at that kind of we look at that information that goes out and it's going to hamper our investigation, we may not put a bins out because of that. So that's when you talk about risk factors compromising law enforcement efforts, that's kind of what we're talking about. Is it going to hamper the police investigation? And we're going to balance that with the safety of our community. Any questions so far? None. For the people that are here. All right, so we'll continue. So the bins types. The first one's the emergency notification. Those are something that's immediate threat, and that we have confirmation that, yes, it is an immediate threat, it is an emergency. So that's going to be the emergency notification, and that was one of the bins that we'll put out. The timely warning is a threat that is serious, that's ongoing, and may be repeated. The other portion of that is going to be issued when pertinent information is available. So the Hines incident, we just kind of mentioned that one. We didn't have that pertinent information to put out. We didn't have the suspect description until hours later. So that's one of the reasons why the timely warning wasn't put out. The second one is the location. Is it 2 blocks or a block from the school? It is, but it's downstairs in a public building. The one that we don't have any jurisdiction with. But is it close enough? It might be close enough, but it's still, we didn't have the pertinent information to put out. So those are kind of the things that we kind of look at. The last one, I think, should be up. The next slide. Oh, is the alert. I don't think is the alert up there. It might be on the next slide. Oh, the advisory. Okay. It is up there. So here's some, no, that's fine. So you can go through give you some ideas, some examples of what an emergency notification is and what a timely warning is. Early emergency notification, things like fires, outbreak of meningitis, armed intruder, those kind of extreme weather, anything like that that's immediate will put out the emergency notification. Timely warnings are those clearly criminal acts, homicide, sexual assault, aggravated assault, robbery, burglary, motor vehicle, arson, hate crimes, and the assault. So those are what we typically would call the mandated crimes that we have to report that happen on campus. So the timely warning, again, we're going to kind of put out in a timely manner, but with pertinent information. Emergency notification is going to go out as soon as we can confirm the emergency. This is another kind of bins alert or notification that we'll put out as just an advisory. Some of these type of things will come out if there's like a series of criminal activity occurring, a lot of burglaries or break-ins, car burglaries, things like that. Weather-related situations we'll put out just to be aware, maybe snow coming in to get people time to leave and get off of campus, those kind of things. Power outages, water emergencies, a broken water line, we'll let you know those are occurring to kind of help you stay out of the area so you don't get caught in Boston traffic, those kind of things. Minor thefts, if we see a pattern of thefts, we'll try to put that kind of advisory out just to give the community notice, hey, be on the lookout for this kind of theft occurring, just to make sure that the information is out there so you can protect yourself. Bins incident location. And here again is kind of some kind of things we're going to look at as far as on campus and off campus. So when a bins incident, when we talk about the location, we're going to talk about any building or property owned or controlled by Berklee. Any building or property that is reasonably contiguous to Berklee owned property. So maybe a building next door, maybe a building the next block over, we'll probably look at. We just want to know how close that building is to one of ours, and that building supports or relates a Berklee educational purpose. I know there was something brought up about the Heinz. I know it's only 2 or 3 blocks from one of our buildings, which would be 31 on Mass Ave. But again, could we say that would be close enough? Could that be on campus because it's 2 blocks from our campus? We probably could. But then there's other information, the description we didn't get till later, those kind of things. So that played into it as well. The location considered to be is treated as part of campus. So that building that's 2 blocks away, do we as a community or students, do we treat that as part of our campus? So walking from 939, say down to 31, anywhere through there is probably going to be on campus because there's buildings that are pretty close to each other. There may be a block or 2 apart. So would something right across the street maybe, is it going to be treated as part of the campus or not? So when we look at whether we're going to put a bins out, we're looking at that kind of information as well. So some examples of what we consider to be on campus. The residence halls, obviously, buildings with classrooms, those kind of things we're looking at. Buildings that Berklee leases that we may own, like the Wendy's next to our office. We get calls there quite often to respond. Food and rental and vendor operating on campus in support of the college. So those are kind of some examples of on campus. Parking lots and space agreed to be used by the college. And covered areas students and employees use to access a particular space. So those are all examples of what we look at when we talk about an incident that happened on campus. Off campus. So any building or property owned or controlled by a student organization that is officially recognized by Berklee. I know we don't have them here. That would be like a Greek building or something along those lines that one of the other colleges may have. So it's a building that we actually control and own that may not be right here in the core portion of our campus. Areas owned by a public or private entity, some of those businesses that are across the street or down the block from one of our businesses or one of our buildings, we will probably look at as off campus. Some examples of off campus, the Prudential Building, there's a Five Guys on Huntington Avenue, the Christian Science Center, and Whole Foods, which is just down from our office, we wouldn't consider as part of being our campus, on campus. Any questions on or off campus? Nothing yet. We got one. Go for it.
Fordham Road. Yeah, so that would be considered on campus, obviously just not a part of the contiguous campus. Our police officers do patrol that multiple times a day. We do have access control measures. We have surveillance cameras and things like that. So if an incident does occur at Fordham Road or within reasonable proximity, a Ben's message would certainly go out regarding 25 Fordham Road. And that has happened every once in a while, not recently, but when it does arise, Fordham Road certainly does qualify, even though it's a mile and a half away from our core campus here. Good question.
Anything else? No other questions. That's it? All right. So part of our jurisdiction, this one's kind of tough. So kind of the calls we respond to, not only to our buildings, but in between buildings, if students are walking from one building to the next using like Boylston or Com Ave. Those are probably the easiest to kind of recognize as routes between our buildings that we respond to and we have jurisdiction in. But those routinely patrolled public ways, so those streets that the campus community use and directly to reach a property or facilities that's either owned by Berklee. So anything pretty much from this building down to Com Ave or coming back this way. There's Com Ave will have a few blocks down that we have a lot of buildings on that area. So if they're going from one location to another, we'll have jurisdiction or we'll respond to calls in that area. The non-routine travel routes, we typically don't conduct any type of law enforcement activities. Say an officer's driving from out front here to Fordham. Depending on the route he goes or she goes, the traveling from here to there, we probably won't conduct any type of law enforcement activities until we're at the address at Fordham. But if you're going down Boylston Ave or you hit Mass Avenue, you make a left, this area right here are definitely we can do some law enforcement activities, respond to calls and those kind of things. So if they're not routinely used by our students or the campus community, we're probably not going to be able to conduct any type of law enforcement activities on those routes. So just a couple of examples here. So a city block with Berklee building on it or street leading to it, like I just mentioned, Boylston and Mass Ave. Some streets that we commonly patrol, we kind of Mass Ave, Boylston, Com Ave, Hemingway, Haviland, and the Fenway area. So those are kind of all routinely traveled public ways that our students use to get from one Berklee building to another. So we'll definitely have some jurisdiction in those. And that comes from the Smeaton case in 2013 that kind of laid out some of that jurisdiction and what kind of law enforcement activities that we're allowed to conduct as special state police officers. Anything on jurisdiction or bends? They're kind of mingled together with our jurisdiction and the bends notification. No questions on that? Go for it.
So you are notifying Berklee students and staff and everybody about something going on. What about because you're so intertwined with the community, do you notify some of the community or how would the community know that there's an ongoing problem? Let's say, this an active shooter or something like that. How would people know who are not students or something?
A lot of them have been able to put their phone numbers into the system. I know there's the Neighborhood Improvement Committee that we're kind of a part of when we had to. A lot of those community members have access to the BINS notifications. We'll put stuff out on Facebook. We have other avenues and platforms that we'll send the information out. Do you want to add other information?
We, on a case-by-case basis, will add individuals to the Benz system as requested. Business owners, neighbors, and things like that. So we do have a handful of those. When we do attend these neighborhood improvement committee meetings, we reiterate, if you're looking to receive these notifications, let us know, and we can add you in one by one as necessary. There's not huge demand, but we do have a large contingent of concerned neighbors in the system that are very appreciative of the message that we do send out.
Thank you, sir. And the last portion here, I know we talked about our jurisdiction and some of the stuff that we do here on campus. There's been a lot of questions that come up, how we're dealing with our vulnerable population here on campus, and particularly around Boylston, the Finns, and Mass Ave, and all the activity up and down those streets. So I figured it'd be easier if we talked about some of the legal challenges that we face, because a lot of times we're asked to do something, and it's not that we don't want to, but a lot of times we just don't have the legal authority to do it. So it kind of makes it look like, you know, your police officers aren't doing anything. Well, there's some reasons for that. So some of the legal challenges that we face in dealing with some of our vulnerable population is our ability to arrest and move people along from being stagnant in one location is protected. So it's highly restricted on what we can and what we cannot do. And where that comes from are these court cases that we listed up here. And the overall kind of idea of these court cases are these three bullet points. So the courts are going to look at it as a person has the constitutional right to panhandle. They can stand out there and with a cup all day long, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 if they wanted to. And there's really nothing we can do about it. They have the constitutional right to panhandle. And the reason the courts look at that is because we as the community can walk right past them and continue walking. We don't have to stop to give them money. We can walk right past them. And the way the courts look at somebody panhandling is that they don't see any difference between them panhandling and charities soliciting for some type of donation. So they look at those two the same way. So if somebody was Salvation Army sitting out front ringing the bell, we couldn't ask them to leave either, just like we can't ask somebody out front. If they're standing there by themselves and not giving somebody a hard time or harassing them, being aggressive, physically touching and assaulting them or anything along those lines, there's really not a whole lot we can do. We will certainly go and ask them to move along because they're crowding a sidewalk. There might be 7 or 8 of them gathering and they're blocking the sidewalk and you're having to walk out in the street to get around them. We will definitely ask them to kind of move on at that point because they're impeding the sidewalk. So it's kind of it's a delicate balance between making arrests and getting them moving along and showing some compassion and empathy for them. So it's a kind of a delicate balance between those two. Some other legal challenges that we're facing is many of those kind of activities that our homeless and vulnerable populations are engaged in are the same type of criminal offenses that our district attorney's office won't be prosecuting. They won't prosecute some of these cases. So I've listed some of those cases that most of our vulnerable population engage in. So the criminal trespass, trying to get into our buildings, checking door handles and those kind of things. Larcenies, which are thefts, disturbing the peace, breaking and entering to sleep or escape the cold. That happens quite often. Somebody comes home in one of the buildings and somebody's asleep in the stoop or inside the front door. They're on the ground, they're on the floor asleep, and you're having to step over them, and they'll call and say, hey, can you arrest this person for breaking and entering? Well, we can't. If they can, all they have to say is, well, we're trying to get out of the cold. and there's really not a whole lot we're going to be able to do about it. Stuff like some larcenies, they won't prosecute. If we get the property back, they're not going to prosecute. What we'd have to do is we have to show that there's a pattern of this individual committing larcenies on campus repeatedly, and that might be the only way we're going to be able to get around to a prosecution. But if the person's involved in some substance abuse or have some mental health issues, they're typically not going to make an arrest. They're going to want to send those individuals to resources that are available to them, some mental health resources to get them the help they need. You guys want to say anything on that? Okay. So just recently, the larcenies, the thefts, the dollar amount has gone up. So now it's at, I think it's $1,200. So anything under that, they're really not going to prosecute. They're not going to prosecute. If it's over $1,200, then they're going to look at it as a dollar amount, and they might be able to prosecute. So some of those larcenies, a lot of it's going to depend on what the dollar amount is, whether they're going to prosecute or not. And again, there's other issues as well, substance abuse and those kind of things. Is it a pattern? Did we get the items back? Those kind of things they're going to look at as well. Anything on that portion? No? No questions? It's making perfect sense, right? All right, so the last couple of slides here, some resources that I think we're going to try to push out, and we wanted to talk about it today to kind of give you an idea of what our department is looking at and some of the resources that we have, not only for our vulnerable population, but for the community as well. The first one is the Pine Street Inn street team. Again, there's a lot of things we can't do, but there's things that we can do to help our vulnerable population. My idea is we're not going to be able to arrest our way out of a problem. It's just not going to happen. So we collaborate with Pine Street. What they'll do is they'll come out, they'll try to talk the person into getting the resources they need, getting into a shelter, and some of those kind of things. So we work closely with them. Sharing information and collaborate with the Boston PD. So we're routinely talking to them as well, sharing information, trying to get, identify some of the vulnerable population to get out and talk to them, to get the resources they need, and try to convince them to get into the resources or a shelter. We're working with the Fenway Neighborhood Improvement Committee. We attend those meetings. A lot of times they'll share information on people that are getting into their buildings and try to identify them. So we'll help try to identify them, and then we'll try to go and talk to them and try to get them into the shelter or get them the resources that they need. One of the things we're researching now is an alternative to arrest. It's called the Section 35. We just had a couple of our officers, I think Lieutenant McKay and one of our other supervisors went down to talk to the courts to try to see what that process is like and see if it's a viable process for us. Kind of just a real brief explanation of what Section 35 is. It's taking somebody who might be an immediate threat and not arresting them, but getting them in front of the court and describing to the court how they're being a threat to themselves or others. And then from that, they'll try to get them into a rehab center for, I believe it was for 60 days, up to 60 days. So they're not going to jail, they're going to rehab instead of going to jail and those kind of things. So that's something we're looking at. It may take a while to kind of get that whole process done, but that's definitely something that I think is that might be able to help with our vulnerable population. The last slide here, probably the most important thing I think out of this whole slide is if there are concerns, is just call the police, is just call us. You can call that first number is a non-emergency number. The second number is the emergency number if you call from a phone on campus. all you'd have to dial is the 4-8s, and you'll get right to our dispatch office. We try to encourage students and everyone to put those numbers into your phone. So if you need them, they're handy. You can always call 911, and if you need emergency help, you can call 911.
You can also text 911 now. That's a relatively recent thing in the state. You can text 911 emergency services from your cell phone.
The other thing we're going to say is to utilize those resources we do have. Some of those pop-up events we're going to be having, we're going to be handing out some of this information so that everybody is aware. We're putting it on our Facebook page. We're putting it on our web page. So we're doing all those. We're trying to get the information out there. We just need the community to get involved and start using them. Definitely the safety escorts, the attend our training sessions. We'll put, like I said, we'll put that information out. The Rave Guardian app is another thing, another kind of application that we're trying to push as well. Again, it's just that virtual escort. We'll be able to follow you on the screen at our dispatch office. So it's kind of a handy app. If you don't feel like calling and waiting for one of our safety escorts, you can always use the Rave Guardian app. You want to say anything about the Rave Guardian?
Yeah, you said it. It's the virtual safety escort. It's a text-to-tip feature, which allows you to submit anonymous tips to public safety to Berklee Police directly if you so choose. It's got some helpful resources as well, so I encourage you to download the app, set it up on your phone. It's a real quick process because you want to be able to have that app available to you in the event of an emergency. This was born out of a need to communicate directly with police when we tell you not to call. And in the case of, let's say, an armed intruder where you're supposed to be silent, how are you supposed to communicate details about the location of an incident if you're not supposed to call on the phone? Well, that's exactly how you would do so. You could certainly use the Rave Guardian app for Berklee Police, or obviously now you can text directly with 911, which will get you to Massachusetts State Police.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? From all two of you? No? No questions? That is it. Thank you guys for being here. We really appreciate it. If there's anything we could do, please let us know. Thank you.